lots of different resources out there to help research historic properties. Just a few resources include physical details such as date stones, but also photographs, oral histories, drawings, and newspapers. Another very valuable resource are maps. Maps can show us details on the growth of a city over time and how the physical and cultural landscape changes. Early maps can be limited, but often outline streets, property owners, and sometimes primary buildings. There are several map series such as Hopkins, U.S. Topographic, but this video will focus on historic Sanborn Insurance Maps. The Sanborn Map Company was created for fire insurance companies to assess liability in towns across the country. Maps were first drawn in mid-1800s and continued up until the 1960s. Larger cities had volumes published showing details of neighborhoods and small communities covering the bulk of an individual town. The maps can be broken down into initial and often decorative cover page, highlighting the town name and its year published. Additional information may include street names and featured properties such as schools or churches within an index showing what street they can be found. The key depicts a breakdown of symbols, color, and line markings. In the map, an individual property may be highlighted for features such as types of use, materials, number of stories, and even business types or names. Sanborn maps can be found on the Library of Congress as well as the State Library Digital Archives. Original versions or copies may be found at your local library, historical society, or within a city archive or town hall. These maps are a valuable resource to see how a community has changed or in some ways stayed the same. In this video, we will take a look at a well-known block of Front Street in downtown Natchitoches. First up is a map from 1892. Zooming in, we can see the town label, where we can see the date completed, October 1892, as well as the population of 2,500, and related resources to fire emergencies such as water facilities. Also on this overall map, we can see the key, not very detailed here, but through this we can see that yellow structures represent frame buildings, red is brick, blue is stone, gray is iron, etc. Here we find an example of a more detailed key that can be used across all Sanborn maps over time, where we get the breakdown of heights and materials and different dwellings and other references. Looking at our block in particular, we can see individual buildings and we can see the street address numbers at this time. Also the number of stories and different types of businesses. Here at the block bound by Lafayette, Front, Horn, and Second, we can see mostly brick buildings along Front Street with general stores, groceries, and a saloon. In the center of the block, it is marked that an existing building will soon be removed. Several frame outbuildings or warehouses are located behind these buildings or on Side Street. Also note the City Hotel and Baptist Church on Second. Moving on to our next map, we come to 1899. On Front Street, we see a new set of brick buildings featuring 7 storefronts and frame awnings that were built between 1892 and 1899 near the corner of Front and Lafayette. In the center of the block, if you remember, there was a building to be removed and replaced. We can see that new building was built here in the center of the block is 2 stories, brick, and a general store. Additionally, new frame building warehouses have been added in the center of the block and on the side streets. There's even a note marking small lumber piles. Also at the corner of Lafayette and Second is the M.E. Church. This corner was previously covered by a key in 1892. Continuing on to the 20th century, here we come to 1904. We don't see many changes in new buildings, but do make note of 2 of the frame buildings facing Second. The City Hotel is now referred as Hotel Poet, and the Baptist Church now the Jewish synagogue. Just a few years later, our next recorded map is from 1909, and continues to be mostly the same, but we can see a few of the brick commercial buildings are now labeled vacant. Also, the City Hotel, or Hotel Poet, is now labeled for boarding, showing a change a small change in use. Continuing to 1914, we're first going to take a look at our index cover sheet. Here we can see the familiar label of the town name continues to be the same, but we can see population has increased to 4,000 at this time. To the left of that, we can see a more detailed description of water facilities and the fire department. Looking at our map, you may see growth, of course, in the downtown area in the city of Natchitoches with these colored squares. Each of these squares represents a page within the series of this map. So for example, our block is in block number 5, the green shaded there. So when we want to look in more depth of that block, we will go to page 5 of this series. You'll also see the index of street names, where we can find those streets and their associated pages within the series. Looking at our block for here in 1914, we can see more defined roof and wall lines, as well as more defined parcels. The ME Church has become Woodman of the World Lodge Hall, as well as additional frame structures are added and connected to existing structures. The last map available is 1923, and not a lot has changed to the block with the exception of the Natchitoches Motor Company. It appears as a new and expanded brick structure was built with additional frame sections. All 3 sections feature a concrete floor, and just across the street we see a new filling station for gas vehicles has been added. Much of the rest of the block has remained the same, but we can really get a sense of what commerce and this block looked like in 1923. Now let's take a look at this block through the years side by side. Here we can see at the corner of Front and Horn has remained largely unchanged. The other end of Front Street has continued to change during the 20th century and even until today. By looking at this individual block and individual years side by side, we can get a really good sense of how things have changed and a better sense of dating buildings and materials, or seeing minor changes, including the example of the hotel from name but also usage. And for a final comparison, let's take a look at our last Sanborn from 1923 to a recent aerial view from Google Maps. We can see that behind the main stretch of Front Street, as well as the side streets, the interior of the block have continued to evolve, but the early buildings on Front Street are still preserved. Maps are just one tool to see how things have changed, but also how things have been preserved. Searching both digital and local archives can help you learn more about sites you're researching and in your community. Learn about other resources by visiting www.lthp.org.